Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Chiu, lead of Hong Kong community in Norway. Welcome to the last panelist discussion of today on China and Norwegian civil and state security. The technological advancement have provided people with new possibilities to interact, communicate, share knowledge, and solve issues in different fields. While many have exploited new technology and enjoyed the benefits, we also have witnessed how technology is used to have total control over the people in China. Already in 2017, China has started massive collection of data. Iris scan, fingerprints, audio and image samples, blood samples, and other biometrical data. It implements discriminatory technologies to control Uyghur language videos on, for example, social media apps Douyin, as well as 1 to 3 million Uyghurs and other Turkic people in concentration camps contributing to forced labor products over the world. Human rights violations did not stop here. Sophisticated, inhuman technological solutions are spreading to other authoritarian countries. Transnational repression targeted towards Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, including both political and non-political activists, are increasing. While the privacy regulations and law do not apply in China, its national security law obligates all individuals and companies inside and outside China to provide data to the Chinese government upon request. So in the last Chinese Party Congress in Beijing, Xi Jinping told the world that China will dominate technology. We have witnessed how technology can be used to target specific individuals, ethnicity, or the whole population. What can we await and what can be done in this regards? All this will be discussed in the coming panel, moderated by Ahmed Amro, research fellow and candidate for PhD in cybersecurity. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here and tackling this important issue. As Jessica mentioned, the topics that we will discuss related basically to the Chinese influence on the digital space and the types of threats that are there. How realistic are they? Are they witnessed in Norway? Really, who people who are from Chinese descendants or critics or others should be worried about that? And for that, we will have our panelists. Should we go there? Should we move to the inside? Yeah, if you feel free to move here. I will introduce our panelists. I will start first with Bjørn Remseth. Yes, he's the vice president and founding member of FAN, Elektronisk Frontier Norway, which is a digital rights organization and a part of IDRI, the European Digital Rights for defending rights and freedom online. He's also a software engineer and experience in search engine development, telecommunication and software development, and internet scale computation. He is deeply interested in digital rights and how they influence human rights, which fits perfectly this topic. Also, I will introduce online, joining us Jing-Jie Chen, who is a campaigner and a researcher at Safeguard Defenders, based in Paris and Taipei. His work concerns China's rule and law, access to justice, and transnational repression issues, impacting dissidents and critics around the world, as well as international human rights law. He formerly worked with Taiwanese and international NGOs on the UN human rights mechanisms, international human rights law, and asylum issues. Also, at last, not the least, of course, we have Adiljan Abdurihim, Secretary of the Norwegian Uyghur Committee. Sorry. Okay, we can start the discussion by first talking about the different shapes and form of transnational repression as a threat imposed by China and targeting Chinese descendant critics and others. If anyone from the panelists would like to take the floor on that, feel free to do so. anyone? Jing-Jie, can you start with, for example, what
Yeah.
types of case laws have you handled or came across you regarding transnational repression?
Right, yeah. Sorry, I was not able to see anyone on the screen, so I was not sure if anyone is wanting to join it. But thank you for inviting us to this panel. So I will start kind of giving the backgrounds of Safeguard Defenders campaign on transnational repression. So just a brief definition, transnational repression is basically a method of, well, repressive methods targeting dissidents or Chinese diaspora. Well, yeah, doesn't have to do with Chinese diaspora, but then in the context of China's transnational repression is targeting anyone who has Chinese origins. So it doesn't matter if this person is right now a Norwegian citizen already or a French citizen, as long as there's a link with the, China, and is critical about Chinese government, then this person can be a target. And the methods include kidnapping, using also technology to spy and to send threatening emails or phone calls, and basically wanting this person to be silent, to not talk about anything against China. So this is basically a brief introduction of how Chinese transnational repression works. So Safeguard Defender has been trying to map this kind of cases around the world. So in January this year, we published one report that's called Involuntary Returns. So involuntary returns basically is one of the ways in one of the transnational repression done by the Chinese governments in order to bring anyone from abroad to China. So this is what we have been focusing on. Why this is important? First of all, there have been lots of people coming to Europe or coming, to different countries, escaping from China, mainly due to the human rights issues inside China, and also the lack of transparency and also the lack of fair trials, no access to justice. And then so these people, when they were brought, when they were brought back to China, that means they could face torture. And then so when Chinese government try to target those people abroad, there are three ways they can do that, right? So they can try to, contact the family members who are still inside China and to ask them to contact those people. So this is kind of an indirect threat. When you receive messages from or calls from your family members in China saying that, hey, we have been visited by the police or some of our members have been detained, that is a real risk for you. And then when you receive those messages, you might want to go back to China in order to save or kind of to save your family or kind of to leave them alone. Second way is to have Chinese agents directly contacting those targets abroad, really want them to come back to China, otherwise there will be consequences. And that's related to our reports published recently about the overseas Chinese service stations around the world, which I will cover a bit later. The third one is direct kidnapping. That involves, basically sending Chinese agents abroad illegally, bringing this person or group of people from a foreign country in a foreign jurisdiction to China. So those are very specific transnational repression that we think it's illegal, irregular, but we also have to note that there are different ways for them to do that. For example, via Interpol system, just put anyone they want on the red notice system, or use normal judicial cooperation agreements or extradition agreements to bring anyone they want to China by accusing them of any sort of crime. So we've been mapping up, and there have been more and more cases coming up. And just to talk about the talk about how many countries are involved. Well, basically, almost all the countries might have victims, and we're still locating the cases. And this is not just about Chinese or Uyghurs. It sometimes also has to do people who has, again, as I mentioned, they are foreign citizen but has Chinese origin. So this for us is really concerning. And then we are still trying to work on this campaign so that people can understand more and to establish a system where when dissidents are being targeted, they're able to speak, talk to the police, and the police can actually take actions to protect them.
How about other panelists? We can also highlight how realistic, for instance, these are the worst case scenarios that can happen and approaches that China is actually doing that. But if you can mention other cases and also comment on how realistic is it for people who live in Norway, either from Chinese descendants or critics or have some talk or opinions about China. How realistic do you think the fear of these threats are?
Well, I think sorry.
So, but we can, if you can have 1 or 2 minutes to comment on this, and then we can see the opinion of the other panelists.
No, please.
Yeah, you
go
can
ahead.
go on with you can have the floor for additional 2 minutes. Jing, you can have the floor for 2 minutes to comment on this. Yeah, sorry.
Sure. Well, for sure, the fear is always there. And we have been also seeing cases in Europe. So we have seen cases in France where a woman being targeted, being, approached by the Chinese agents. We have seen also people in Cyprus and Portugal being targeted again by the agents directly. Their family members, well, obviously innocent, are also targeted, including their children. So if they can do that in the European countries, and I suppose Norway is part of this greater European community, then I do not think that there's zero risk. I think the risk is always there. It also depends on how our government is going to react on that to be able to protect the victims.
I think we have to see different pictures, and what you are saying is true. Transnational repression became increasing, especially targeting the Uyghurs, not only in Norway, but for example, mostly in Arabic countries. When in 2018 the government actively started to ask or forcibly ask them to come back to China. And most of them started to flee around, and majority came to Turkey, and we have a lot of the population now there. But unfortunately, it didn't stop there. The Turkish government recently signed the extradition rule. It's not ratified yet in Turkish parliament, but still there is different cases where, for example, the police interrogating the people, and the people are very afraid of saying something and reporting these cases to different human rights organizations. When it comes to Norway, when we have seen that since 2017-2018, the government was directly approaching Uyghurs in Norway, asking to provide the personal data, sensitive data, even like family members who, for example, children who has been born here. We have seen how family members has been taken hostage, forced to either you provide the data or your family members will be sent to concentration camps, and we have cases here in Norway too. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. We started getting like automated robocalls from the Chinese embassy. There is always some phishing or spam, or even there is some cases where, for example, images like files have been distributed, and if you just click on that one, then all your mobile phone is like kind of infected with the malware, and all the information data can be sent back to this Chinese entities. And when it comes to Uyghurs in Norway, they're totally in fear, because you repeatedly providing this kind of information that you are approached by the Chinese police and you are a Norwegian citizen, and this is ongoing several years and nothing is done. There is no response from the, for example, government solidly saying that these kind of actions are not kind of normal, okay, and they are not vocal about the situation. And what happens eventually is that the people are more and more afraid, and they silence themselves. And unfortunately, this kidnapping is not maybe so much broadly here, but we have seen, for example, Uyghurs who has been forcibly sent to, for example, from Thailand or other countries neighboring to China.
Bjørn, what do you have a comment about what your personal comments, or from FN, what type of input can you provide about this?
Well, so as you probably can see, I'm not an expert on China at all, but I do know a thing or two about how to use information systems. So I would like to just describe how I see this as from the perspective of information weapons, cyber weapons, because that just brings a few things into focus in my mind. So, by the way, much of what I'm going to say is just fished out by a book by a guy named Christopher Wiley. He used to work for Cambridge Analytica, which did make information weapons. Now, but information weapon has at least 3 pieces. One of them is a targeting mechanism, which is used to find who are you gonna hit with something, right? So many of the things that have been described today or so far are just targeting things like biometrics, behavioral things, genetic information, so on and so forth, that identifies individuals that you can do something about. Also interaction patterns between people, communication patterns, that you can use for traffic analysis to see who are the most important people in a group of people and so on, still targeting, okay? And then you have a set of tools that you use to deliver something, and that could be, I mean, an ad on Facebook, or it could be someone knocking on the door and dragging you out to concentration camp. They're both means to deliver something, and then you have what's actually being delivered, which is either a video or something, or incarceration. But there are 2 things missing from this thing, and one of them is the thing I asked really early today is why? Because you don't set this kind of apparatus into motion unless you have reasons, and those reasons, I find it very strange, are very vaguely formulated, right? We hear about the methods of repression, but we don't, and we can analyze them using this or other means, but we don't really hear explicitly why. So I thought that was interesting to hear some thoughts on that today. I'll just jump to another thing, which is what on earth can we do here to protect ourselves and others? And I will actually say 2 things. First of all, is to protect rights, and in particular the right to access information as freely as possible. And the second one is to communicate with anyone you want as freely as you want, without interception. Basically, right to free communication using encryption and so on. So that's the protection part. And the other one is to be very, very, very aware of build-up of capabilities. Capabilities for harvesting biometrics, traffic analysis, logs of any kind. These take time to build up, okay? And they have many, many, many use cases. But you can change your intention from one day to another. And if you have the capability to use that, well, then that's what's going to determine if you can do something with it or not. So, yeah. Again, this is very generic. It's not about China at all, but you can apply everything I just said to things that have been said earlier today.
And I think I can comment on why, more like on Uyghur perspective. So East Turkestan was occupied in 1949, and since that occupation time, we Uyghurs had the possibility, or at least like we have been able to protect our identity, culture, and religion. And it's known fact that East Turkestan is can be a potentially independent country, and it has a lot of the resources, And the Belt Road initiative that was presented by the Chinese government is like kind of the main roads that they attach are in the East Turkestan. And for the Chinese government, it's crucial to control this area, not only like kind of physically, but whole population that will be under the control, and that there won't be any possibility, any chances like kind of to disrupt this big plan. And additionally, of course, as Xi Jinping said, he wants the China to dominate in technology area, but the steps on dominating the technological area has already started in East Turkestan, widely backed by the companies like Huawei, Hikvision, and Dahua, who not only presented the ways of the controlling the people in different various ways, like, for example, ethnicity recognition. It's not about facial recognition anymore, but it's ethnicity recognition. They have built a big data. They provided the IOGP application where you store all the information in one place, and you have this broad connection, not only inside the East Turkestan of the Uyghurs, but abroad. And this kind of the solutions can be used not only in East Turkestan now. It can be used in other authoritarian countries. And I think the simple question, and that of course can be very broad, is that they want total control, not only in the East Turkestan, but China and in the world.
Now I will bring another topic, which is related to the China national security law. Jing-Jie, if you can comment on the matter of how can someone an incident turn into a case law. For instance, when this new, I don't know if the audience have heard about employees from TikTok in China have told and reported and admitted that people in China has access to European content. And it's not only in China, in many other areas, places in the world. This is a documented case, and it's known. So China and other places in the world has access to content of European citizens, including Norwegian. So if you are recording, and a lot of people are recording in multiple areas, it has been known to be able to collect a lot of information, location information, such that. How can such issues be handled in legal manners? Can someone feeling that I feel threatened can address safeguard defenders for maybe to address initiate a case law? Can you comment on that, Jing-Jie? Yeah.
Well, well, that's a very interesting question. Well, my direct answer is that on national security law, it's very arbitrary. Like many different Chinese law, trying to prosecute you. Well, it doesn't really need, very concrete excuses. Sometimes it doesn't really need evidence. So that it became arbitrary, and everything can be, cut off in time to be a threat to the national security. You can be just a journalist reporting the issues in Wuhan on COVID, or we can be, just a regular person, but then trying to defend your rights because your house is being destroyed under the urban planning project and so on and so forth. You can very arbitrarily being, targeted inside China. And this is not just about China. They're trying to then expand this extraterritorial kind of jurisdictions in order to be able to catch anyone who's trying to criticize China from abroad. And a very interesting development is on Weibo, basically one of the biggest kind of network. It's kind of like a Chinese version of Facebook, being able to comment and share some sources. this year they started to have this policy that the location of the user has been shown on that comment. So basically in a way to see whether those people are here in China, if it's so, and in which city, make it a lot easier to locate. So that's of course a very serious threat. But then it also shows people who are connecting from abroad, and then they are able to then trace back. For a very long time, they have this online police being able to target people who have been saying anything bad. So I would just say, in general, this national security law, like many other laws, they always open this back door. For example, having special circumstances arbitrarily decided by the law enforcement, again without judicial review. People who are attending this this meeting today might also, when you make comments on that, might also be targeted. Another interesting thing I would like to add is that, well, we cyber defenders are, we do assist cases, but personally, myself, I haven't dealt with any case of national security law because, oftentimes they don't really need this law in order to bring you back to China, or they don't really need to use this in order to prosecute you. Oftentimes they can use economic crimes, corruptions, or say, provoking troubles. Those, charges can easily be implemented on any particular person. So, of course, national security law is a bit like higher level, and then restricting many aspects of your rights, even from abroad. And that is also concerning, right? Because when you then being considered as as a perpetrator, offender of the national security law, they might be able to put this on any extradition requests, or say requesting another country that has judicial cooperation agreement with China to locate this person, arrest this person, and bring this person back. So I would say this is something that we're working on. That's why we're trying to campaign, advocates on that, to stop countries signing extradition agreements, judicial cooperation agreement with China, and then also to make them understand that there is this defect, there is this lack of justice in China. And again, the law, the charges, the accusations can be very arbitrary.
Thank you. I now will ask a question about in the direction of new policy of Norway regarding China, about how we can really solve these, address these threats. You have mentioned, Bjørn, some technical suggestions and guidance, but can we highlight what bodies in Norway can address this threat? For instance, in 2018, BST for the first time recognized and admit that there was a hack by a Chinese threat group against a Norwegian government entity. BST can detect and operate and find out such issues, but who else can work on enforcing further protection for people who are afraid of their life being surveillanced or their phones being targeted? Which bodies in Norway can be
then you need to be very careful, because there's nothing more dangerous than a secure communication system that isn't secure.
Okay, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're saying a very valid point that there is problem in Uyghur communities that, for example, this knowledge should be there. This is the first thing. That you, for example, using various application can, in some extent, kinda secure yourself, or for example, using the VPNs and so on. But not many of them kinda know and possess this kind of knowledge. The second thing is that we somehow connected to the East Turkestan. So we have family members, we have friends, and only way to communicate using the Chinese. At the time, I'm not sharing anything on social media about my family members. I'm not sending, even using actively the geolocation. It's kind of became a very daily normal thing for me. But actually, if you tell for my Norwegian friends, they just laugh. They say, yeah, we kind of in a very good country. We have this privacy and GDPR and so on and so on, but they don't know and they do not understand the China. China do not respect this. They don't have any regulations. They do not have respect on the law. So this is a very tricky and difficult thing, but I would say that the main question would be that not only government, but for example the commerce, the companies have to take Uyghurs' cases as a use case and try to protect themselves, because if they have free trade agreement, if they have, for example, companies in China, how they will protect themselves, because what happened to us can happen to them too.
I actually do have one very small comment there. So in a previous job, I was head of the local union chapter, which is an interesting thing. I recommend everyone to do that if they have the opportunity. But one of the things that we absolutely needed to do there was, of course, to communicate securely. So even here in Norway, we did take measures to have operational security within our union. And I mean, that's a common thing. So I guess perhaps trade unions could be someone who could collaborate on this, because they have somewhat overlapping needs. I do have another comment, and that is a much more roundabout way to get to this. So one of the problems with things you purchase from China is that in the declaration that comes with them, you can say what it does and how much it weighs and so on and so forth. Maybe does it not contain toxic materials? It doesn't say how much toxic work or other things that come with it. So that would be something that would be very useful, to be able to have what's it called, the varedeklarasjon, declaration of content, whatever is in the product, which is not the physical things, so that you can go to, I don't know, you're buying a lipstick, and you look at the barcode and you can see how much slave work was involved in creating that or something. I mean, that would be useful, and it would delegate to the lowest level of consumption at least some agency, which is currently not available. So that is another way that we could use technology to work against this. It's very roundabout, but again, if you can get millions or billions of people to be more aware of this, it could have an effect.
I will also bring to the table other issue, which is sometimes it's okay, maybe people who are technologically vigilant and know how to handle technology can protect themselves, can use a VPN, can buy products which are not manufactured in China, or at least know how to protect themselves. But there are other threats sometimes that are not related to personal usage, where, for instance, cameras around us. There are, I don't know if you know, that, for example, like Shodan, it's an Internet of Things search engine where you can go and search open cameras worldwide. In Norway, there are not much, which is a good thing. Norway is one of the clean country digitally. In China, there are more than 2,000 and more, and they are just streaming live on the street. This is what regular people can go and see online. So mass surveillance is there. It's not a question is it's there or not. But what Norway can do to its people who are afraid of such threats, to assure them, like, there are controls there, you are safe, no one can look you up, identify you, build a record
on direction, and it was like kind of okay. But recently what happened is that they started to use the cameras that can be rotating for 360 degrees, and additionally possibly has the face recognition. And we have seen even in a demonstration when the Uyghurs have been there before the embassy, that they actively moving it. And according to the Norwegian law, it's prohibited. So they can install the cameras, but they can film on their area. But most of the time, Norway is so protective of China, because, yeah, China has to be protected very good. And we are placed along from the, just far from on the other side of the street. But still, they filming us. We have been a long process with the data Telsina, but of course the problem is here is that embassies has to be handled according to the Geneva Convention, and there is a lot of thing, and they even like refuse it to answer the questionnaire from the data Telsina. And but the problem is that these kind of the cameras are placed in different places, like for example in Tusenfree, in Rema 1000. And what is worrying me is that if I'm a person of the interest and these cameras has a connection to the internet and there is a backdoors, I can be potentially placed in any place where I'm like kind of moving, not only in Norway, maybe in other countries.
I'll ask a last question before we move to the audience. We can see the audience if they have any question. What do you say about having certain courses or training or guidance for communities who are mostly afraid of such threats, to guide them how you address these fears, which entities you can address for different types of fears? If you are afraid of being surveillance, maybe you go to a technical organization. If you don't know, if you want to raise a case of law, a case for an illegal proceeding, where do you proceed? Has this happened, and can we take it forward? Like, can this be really carried? What do you think, Abdurihim? Yeah.
I'm not sure. The problem is that we trying to report it to intelligence here in Norway. We try to have courses, but of course there is like different groups of the people. So you have elderly people, you have youth generation that may be easy to educate, but for the older generation it's difficult. There is some companies who do, for example, pro bono, some organization, human rights organization that helps, but I think still it's difficult because, as you know, technology is such a tricky thing that even if, for example, my phone is infected, I might not know unless I, for example, use, for example, Wireshark or something like that, and try to see the logs if some of the networks are potentially, potentially can be like kind of compromised. So yes, but it's very difficult to keep everyone to do it. So I don't know how can we. I would really hear from you.
I mean, it is really tricky. What you're describing with looking at stuff from Wireshark and so on, which is a network analysis tool. I mean, even if you have that, it can be you can be fooled because there are ways to circumvent that using steganographic protocols that would hide the information that you egress from the phone. So I mean, it could also lull you into false sense of security. I'm just saying that it's really, really, really difficult. But one thing that we can do, I hope we will do, is to make sure that we get really good legislation in from the EU. Because that seems to be the only way to get really proper, strong regulations in. I mean, GDPR, that's absolutely EU. And I would say that EDRI, which EFN is a part of, we had a really strong part in making sure that regulation came about. But for biometrics in particular, that's ongoing now. That needs to be very strongly regulated. And anyone who does any kind of biometric really has to prove beyond, I mean, way beyond reasonable doubt that they're not up to something fishy. And that's not legally the case today, but it should be the legally the case. And but again, Norway is too small. We need regulation that's at least EU-wide, because then large suppliers will actually take that very seriously.
Now the floor is open for the audience. If you have any question, you are welcome to ask. Or not? Okay. I guess maybe everyone is tired for a long after the internet. whoever wants to misuse that can misuse it. What to do to work, how to protect yourself from it. Maybe some know, maybe some don't know. The law is there. You can always ask what you can do legally, but there's not much to do in such very complex case. So how can we conclude this? Like, what can we do actionable task to make people who are afraid to feel less afraid, like even step toward hopefully at some time they feel much, much better? What can we just take one step forward? Maybe this would be the final remark from each of the panelists. Sorry. Yeah.
I would actually more like to make a comment.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
No.
So you did make a point about the EU. So on the European level, there's, I know at least in Turkey, they have this saying that, are you Norwegian? Actually, more on the European level, we talk about being Scandinavian, which is this kind of naivety that we have towards digital security, but also more about society in general. And this is more or less the opposite of what we need to have when confronting authoritarian states like China. So raising awareness on a societal level is actually something that we as Scandinavians need to internalize.
Now we can start with each of our panelists to have final remarks of what we can take forward. 3 minutes per panelist. Jing-Jie, you can start if you want.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important to, well, not just talk to the civil society, not just to talk to your NGO partners, but also to talk to the law enforcement. As I mentioned, that like sometimes they do not necessarily know how to react on those, say, transnational repression or any risks targeting dissidents. And so that is important to say have trainings and to talk about this issue. It's also important to talk with the ministry level, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Interior, and also to talk to local representatives, to the parliament members, in order to really have this discussion in your parliaments in Norway. Say, for example, the case of UK, they have been talking about this, China's transnational repression, now more and more even in the parliament. So, well, that is kind of like a strong, well, it's itself, it's very symbolic in a way that this is being discussed, and then people are starting to know about this. Of course, you have to be in like a long time involvement, having the community aware of this safety issue. And I think another important thing to highlight is that when we are talking about transnational repression, not only from China, but also, say, for example, from Russia or from other authoritarian governments, we are talking about that general understanding that anyone can be at risk. So now we are not just talking about Uyghurs, we're not just talking about Chinese, we're not just talking about Hong Kongers. We're talking about anyone who are entitled freedom and their rights in the democratic world. If we're not able to do this, if we're not talking about this, if we're not acting, in response to these threats, we're actually losing, our stance in democracy, and that is very disruptive. Well, yeah. So anyone can actually be a contact point to be able to talk to your friends and to talk to the government.
I would say technology is really tricky and complicated for majority, I guess. But what can be done, I think, is that the Uyghur can be used as a use case in understanding how the technology is misused by the Chinese government, and how we can combat it against and find the ways of protecting ourselves. And that's why I think and I do hope that companies like operating on the security, or cybersecurity, or the universities and so on, try to focus on that one rather than just avoiding the Uyghurs because they maybe have some research in China, or they don't want to be seen as too much political.
Yeah, I'm actually going to stop where I started, which is just to reiterate these things about rights and capabilities, because that really is central. But the reason why it's central is that if we in this part of the world can enforce this, use it on a daily basis, that actually does influence the rest of the world. I could tell you about that, but I also have NDAs. So I'll just recap. So there are some rights that needs to be protected, like the right to get information about basically anything and communicate with anyone, anywhere. And to that, I would today learn how to use these rights, also in contested environments. Because in your case, you actually have a state actor, again, as your opposition. That's no joke. And that's something that, I mean, people, it sounds weird, but you know, people do this, have children at school who have parents who are Uyghurs, and they are subject to this. They need to know about this, and more people need to know about that. And also, again, this thing about being very, very, very aware about the build-up of the capabilities, because they are the ones who actually crystallize into threats eventually. Biometrics, traffic analysis, logs, so on and so forth. All legislation that makes that more easily available to anyone should be not necessarily opposed, but they should be really, really strongly justified before they are passed. Yeah, GDPR. There's a GDPR 2 initiative brewing somewhere. That is an EU initiative, and it's gonna enhance consumer rights, we hope. That might be something to look very thoroughly at from this perspective too. Yeah.
So yes, I think we can summarize in total like three major directions, which is basically waiting for more stricter rules like GDPR and more to make our ecosystem, digital ecosystem, more safe. We can raise awareness either between the citizens and among the different organizations who are working to provide the services for Norwegian society. And also, I like the idea of using Uyghurs as use cases, which for that maybe some universities can be approached for conducting research and finding some threats and analyzing these threats in a real way and finding solutions that can really be used and make them feel safe. And yeah, with these remarks, I think we're done. Thank you all for attending this session. And yeah, see you.